Good evening, good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is wealth. So, before you guys start chiming in, I already know I want to thank you guys for watching the reruns that we posted. We had the holiday, we had the election, we had a number of things coming up. But trust me, between myself, Dr. Pete, Dr. Hampton, Dr. Mason, we got all of your messages about where are we. We love the reruns, but we want to see you. We also got your messages about how you wanted to have some couch conversations before the election because you wanted to talk about it. I don't know if that was something we could have talked about at that time, but we love your engagement and we love the fact that you are so concerned about your health care. So, as we always do, we're going to go around the table. Before you ask, Dr. Miller just texted me and said he's still out of town. He didn't have the opportunity to get back into Chicago from the South yet, and he's traveling, but he misses everyone, and he'll see us on next Monday. And we're just going to go right around this table as always, and we're going to do our introductions. Quickly, I want to say hey to Renee 1971, who's here. She chimed in early. Want to say hey to Valdemir Talley, who is here, and he's asking some questions about, are we going to talk about heart health issues in the African American community with a special attention to African American men? Want to say hey to Yolanda Williams that's here. She says good evening. And of course, as always, she says Dr. Terry Mason has changed her life by making her eat just a little bit better. And Jackie Robinson is here just as well. And she says hello to everyone. And I want to tell you that I actually saw Yolanda Williams a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. I saw Yolanda Williams, and girl, you are slimming down. So, Dr. Mason, you're telling her to do, you're going to have to share that along with me too. First up on deck is our very own colleague who is here with us, Dr. Douglas Graham. Doug, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
So thank you, Nikki. I'm a retired physician. I spent about 30 years working in the western suburbs. And for a couple of years, I worked with the representative in his office. And it's a real honor and a pleasure to be here and to work with my colleagues. And I'm going to try to answer your questions if I can.
Outstanding, outstanding. To the urologist that keeps you abreast on Sundays with his radio show, that's our very own Dr. Terry Mason. Dr. Mason.
Thank you again, and thank you, Nikki, for having this forum, and I appreciate everyone and the opportunity to do this, and I look forward to a spirited discussion this evening.
Very good. I want to say hey to Jacqueline Cooper, who just checked in. She says, good evening to everyone. Hey, Jackie, how are you? To the man who really thinks he's Wolfgang Puck, but he is a physician extraordinaire who is also a weight loss guru. That's our very own Dr. Tony Hampton.
Thank you, Nikki. And I am so happy to be back. I had a chance to travel to Austin, Texas, and I love warm weather, but 107 degrees was a little bit warmer than I thought I'd be able to tolerate. Literally, it was like stepping out into an oven, but it was a nice opportunity to go to a conference called KetoCon. I had a chance to speak and talk about how your diet is not the only thing we need to focus on. And as you know, as we talk about healing in our community, we have to deal with social determinants of health. And we also have to deal with those non-dietary issues, sleep, stress, and other factors. So it was nice to share that message. They also had a panel discussion with me and about 5 other doctors talking about just questions that the audience have, just like we do in this format. So it was really a pleasure to do that. And we have another conference coming up next month, Low Carb USA, and that'll be in San Diego, which is a little bit better because they don't get as hot. It's actually like the perfect place to live when it comes to weather. So it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to a great discussion.
All right, to the man who looks like he has a tan, but he's a doctor extraordinaire just as well. With those daughters at the house, and he's actually a very good griller. That's our very own Dr. Pete, Dr. Bonnie Pete Thomas. Dr. Pete.
Hey, Nikki. Thank you, Congressman, for creating this forum for us to share with the community. I'm happy to be back with my colleagues. I missed you guys. I missed you, and I missed our audience. And so I'm ready to help shed some light on some things that we can do to improve our health collectively and then also individually, and share a story or two, if I could, about a patient that I saw that I think could really open the forum up around some other health issues.
Okay. Want to say hey to Jimmy Z, who's here. And Jimmy Z, I'm going to go into reading your question a little later, but I want to say thank you so very much and congratulations on going from 547 pounds down to 341 pounds. So congratulations to you. And we're going to come back and we're going to read your question that you have. I want to say hey to Leonard, who is here with us just as well, and to a couple other people who are chiming in with just their emojis. Apparently, maybe they missed us that much that they just want to send kisses and hearts. But to the man who makes this possible for us on Monday, to the one who is a vanguard on healthcare and who wants to make sure that people are healthy and wealthy, because his verbiage is health is true wealth. That's our very own Congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District. That's Congressman Danny K. Davis.
Well, health is indeed wealth. And let me thank all of us for being present and accounted for. And I look forward to our discussion. There were a lot of people in the urgent care center that I went to Sunday. And I had to go there because I needed to get COVID tested because I was going to the White House today. And of course, you have to get tested before you go over there. And of course, I was indeed pleased that I tested negative. And so I felt real good about that. But I did get up at 4 o'clock this morning because I had to catch a 6 o'clock flight. And so I'm dragging a little bit. Plus, I did 3 hours on radio yesterday, beginning at 7 o'clock in the morning. I did the 7 to 8 shift, and then I did that evening the 7 to 9 shift. And so it's been a pretty busy week. But I must say that I'm concerned a little bit about the social role expectations and obligations as they relate to health. I was totally shocked when I learned that only 2 out of 10 registered voters in Chicago voted the other day. 20%. 2 out of 10. That gives me a great deal of concern, especially since when you define being healthy, the social role expectation is a part of it. And 2 out of 10 isn't that great. I don't know what was taking place and what was going on, but that's kind of what the records show. But I did go to the White House today, and I saw, a whole bunch of people from Chicago there. The governor of Illinois, of course, was there. Tony Preckwinkle was there. I saw Bobby Rush there. I saw Robin Kelly there. I saw Laura Underwood there. And I saw a whole bunch of Chicago citizens there because we were kind of applauding ourselves for having passed some bipartisan gun legislation. But I think all of us recognize that we didn't go as far as we need to go. And we didn't go as far as we will go We just haven't gotten there yet. So let me thank all of us for being engaged, involved, and participating, because if we're going to ever get there, we have to keep moving, and we can never stop. So I'm ready to listen and hear all that we've got going and kick in a word or two every once in a while in terms of what I think we need to be doing. I was very intrigued to hear Chief Tally ask about heart disease and taking care of your heart, because the heart can leave you anytime it wants to. That's my commercial. My favorite commercial is I can get out of here anytime I decide. And so we better look after that heart. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And I see Dr. Maya is now here. We can get this show on the road.
Hello. Hey.
So, Maya, why don't you go ahead and do a brief introduction of yourself, Dr. 100?
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Congressman. Hey, I'm Dr. Maya. Always keeping it 100. Very excited to be here. Finishing work a little late. Happy to join the team and happy to learn from community.
Okay, well, like the congressman said, Chief Valdemar Talley had a question. He said, good evening. I wanted to know if we could be covering some heart health issues in the African-American community with the special attention to African-American men. So, Pete, Tony, Terry, who wants to grab that first?
Yeah, I can chime in with my colleagues. So heart disease is the number one killer in America amongst everyone. And with there are some studies to show that African Americans have a higher propensity to have heart disease due to a salt sensitive gene. There are some studies to show that the way we survived the slave trade was that there was a gene that allowed us to retain salt and hence allow us to survive the sort of really dehydration and all of the things that happened on that horrific trip. And so now generations later, that same gene is holding on to every salt it can get its hands on. And so, I think just getting right into some solutions is really pay attention to the blood vessels in your body can get very stiff due to plaque formation, your diet and things like that. You really want to pay attention to things that can help expand that blood vessel and keep your pressure lower. So that is exercise. That's eating a lot of fruit and vegetables are great. And then don't fight your provider. If your provider wants to put you on high blood pressure medicine, just take the medicine so that we can keep your pressure down. And then you can still implement lifestyle modifications to potentially get off medicine. I tell my patients all the time, I want to be off medicine. I said, no, you want controlled blood pressure. Hook or crook, however that happens, right? If that's weight loss and diet and exercise and fruit and vegetables and things like that, that's great. But if you need a blood pressure medicine, take it, because the end result is that you're here for your family and your community. And so that's my spiel. Any of my other colleagues want to jump in here.
Yeah, I would just add to that, Pete, that we really need to really stop calling this heart disease, because the heart is just one of the many organs that are impacted. And it's a systemic disease. Unfortunately, we pattern our diseases after the specialists that we designed to treat them. And so what we really need to think about is heart disease is not just heart disease. And as Dr. Thomas already said, it's a problem with blockages in your blood vessels all over your body, in your arms, in your legs, in your eyes, everywhere. So you don't have just blockages in one part of the body. That's not the way it works. So when you got blockages or damage to your blood vessels anywhere, you have it everywhere. And depending upon how much damage has been done, and there's a nice graphic, if you listen to watch Forks Over Knives, there's a nice graphic in there that shows you what that looks like. But it depends on how bad that blockage is. If it blocks up enough of the blood vessel that enough blood can't get through to the heart, we call it a heart attack. If it happens to the ones that are in our neck that go up to our brain, we call it a stroke. If it happens to the ones that go to our legs and feed our toes and feet, we call that peripheral vascular disease. But it's all the same. So if you got any of it, you got all of it. Period.
So I'm going to definitely chime in and try to provide another way of looking at it. And I tell you, it's amazing when you continue to be a continuous learner. And so the question is, when those arteries that Dr. Pete and Dr. Mason talked about get clogged up, the question is why? Now, many of you have already heard us say it's inflammation, right? And what's interesting is that there are people who have various dietary patterns and they still end up with heart disease, right? So low fat, low carb, whatever. Then you have people who still get heart disease, even if their cholesterol is normal. And most people don't know that half the people who get heart disease have a normal cholesterol. That's very interesting, right? Sometimes, so what I'm trying to think about is how can we think of this differently? So what they found in some studies is that when your so-called bad cholesterol is high in some people and low in others, and they both do or don't get heart attack, it's about the LDL particles getting stuck, right? And we know we have small and large LDL particles. The small ones tend to get stuck more because they're small, they get into the crevice. The large ones, they bounce off, they don't bother people as much. But imagine that you're traveling down a highway, right? And there's a pothole, right? There's a good chance it's going to cause damage to your car. Well, the same is true for LDL. If the LDL is traveling down the highway, it's a good chance that it may get stuck if there's damage in those arterial walls, right? And that's why some people get it and some people don't. The question is, if we get rid of the damage and stop worrying about this LDL, who's really there to do some good things. It's like the mortar of your house. It's there to tuck point your house so that you can, have a sturdy brick house, as opposed to stuccoing a brick house, right? So the goal is, let's not have potholes in our arteries, right? So what we do is, well, where do the potholes come from? Well, it's called, one of the main reasons is glycation. In other words, the extra sugar that's floating around in your blood, that's going to damage your arterial walls, which is why I'm so into reducing the starchy foods and the sugars. And that damage then leads to those LDL particles getting stuck in your arterial walls. So that's one of the main reasons why cardiovascular disease is so prevalent, because we live in a society where they put sugar in everything. And because we're consuming all of this excessive sugar, we have excessive inflammation. And by the way, too much sugar leads to hyperinsulinemia, where you're making too much insulin. That has a damaging effect. Oh, by the way, too much insulin leads to you absorbing too much sodium or salt in your kidneys. So now you didn't have to ingest the salt. It was the sugar that led to your body holding on to the salt. So yes, and then you say I'm Black and I'm predisposed to being a salt retainer, as Dr. Pete said. So the goal is to understand what the root cause of the problem is, not to mention being a Black man in America and the stress of that, not to mention the issue around lack of sleep, not to mention I'm in a dysfunctional relationship because I haven't been taught how to be in a normal relationship, right? or because society treats me so crazy. I come home and I'm not the man I should be to my family because society has treated me as less than. So it's multifactorial why people of color have more heart disease. But the thing that you can control, you can't stop the cops from pulling you over, right? But you can control what you put on your plate. You can't control taking time to exercise. It's too dangerous outside. Well, I use elastic bands inside my home. So there's things we can do, but we have to understand the root cause of why we get sick. And it's not just because you're African American. It's because you're living in a world that makes it challenging for people of color. But truth be told, most of the things you need to do to heal are things you can't control. So I ask my patients to focus on those issues. And if they do that, they'll have less cardiovascular disease.
Dr. Maya, you look like you have something you want to say.
There's a lot. I wanted to go ahead, and we're talking about heart disease. You asked about men's health, and I was like, well, this is a good opportunity to learn from these men. It's so much created for us, right? A lot of times I sit back and I think about the hubris it must take to create the imperfect storm, that Dr. Hampton, Dr. Reed, like everyone mentioned, right? And so also at the same time, the opportunity to create more hope for our communities, taking out of the hands of other people what we can do to heal our communities today. And that is creating ways to, have activity and things like that. So Dr. Hampton mentioned using elastic bands. I remember walking, I used to live in Washington Park. I distinctly remember kind of walking through Washington Park and seeing Dr. Pete and a group of Black men like running, it's like having a runners group together. I think it was about 5 of them. Then they got the different members of the community involved. So there were women who wanted to run, were able to run with these men and stuff like that and get their exercise in as a group and saying, hey, this is what's going on outside. Let's do this group together. Also, it helps to, and for them, it's free, right? So it doesn't cost a runner's club or a gym membership or anything like that to be involved in kind of running safely around the neighborhood, in a group. Things like that. Also, the endorphins that you have from activity, and honestly, the endorphins we get as our community from fellowship with one another. Just being around each other, seeing each other's face, and encouraging each other to make those healthy lifestyles is great. Also, I recall some of the community gardens that kind of go on, and we're looking at like Black farmers and things like that to kind of do work Dr. Mason, Dr. Hampton, so many people do, which is watching what you put into yourself and encouraging yourself to put out activity, and those things help us to do what we do. Remember, I always talk about primary, secondary, tertiary prevention. Primary prevention, vaccines, exercise, watching nutritional intake, and it doesn't have to also be like, how we're also like, don't eat a lot of grease. Yes, don't eat a lot of grease, but don't eat also things that trigger our bodies, like cutting down on the sugar. Something a person like me is kind of going through that process, and revamping what I eat and re-engaging my taste buds. That's primary prevention. Everything I do to make sure I'm not in a place where I'm in the hospital asking them to then not enact, systemic racism. I'm in those places, right? Things we can do. Also secondary prevention. So that's primary prevention. I'm doing that every day, right? Making it part of my lifestyle. Secondary prevention, going to my doctor's office and getting screened. Like if I have a family history of diabetes, heart disease, things like that. So making sure I make my appointments to get screened and see where I am, seeing if these primary prevention measures are working. Those are things that me, my family, my tribe can own, right? Because what tertiary prevention, everything I'm doing to stay back, in my case, diabetes or heart disease, and in a lot of men's case, black men, diabetes and heart disease. Then I'm taking medicines, to make sure, like tertiary prevention is I'm in the hospital. I'm getting we talked about heart disease and peripheral artery disease and what happens after that, and removing legs and things like that. That's tertiary. That's tertiary. So remember, these things also are progressive. So we talked a lot about, remember that strong man holding back that running car? Remember that? Primary prevention is everything I'm doing to hold that rope. And sometimes we can't do it by ourselves because, again, for our black men, a lot of these situations were created for them, and we have to watch how we see somebody with diabetes and stuff like that. Oh, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't eat sugar. You shouldn't eat. Yeah, we have to say that, but we have to recognize the environment created for them and support them as a community. Nikki, I got a lot of stuff I'm saying. I want to say, I know this is about black men. I know the best people to talk about black men health is these black men here. So I'm gonna stop there and chime in later.
Well, it wasn't necessarily about black men. That was just the question that the gentleman had.
Oh.
He was talking about African Americans' heart disease and with the special attention to, because I think I know he's a black man. So I think he wanted to make sure, was he doing what was right? But you had some great answers and resources for them there. Jimmy Z says, good evening. I'm a carnivore since January of 2020. I was 547 pounds, now 341, still losing, off all meds, including insulin. My question is, how can I get rid of foot neuropathy? Is this permanent?
Yeah, I don't think, let me just say it differently. Most chronic inflammatory conditions, circumstances that lead to neuropathy are reversible, but it depends on the level of damage. How is it that a carnivore can do that? And that's because rather you're a carnivore, a vegan, low carb, keto, Mediterranean, DASH diet, if you remove a lot of processed foods from your diet, you will immediately reduce inflammation in your body, lose weight, and do really well. So that's how this, and again, I went to a keto conference in Austin, Texas, where many people who were there were carnivores. In fact, I met for the first time A-Day Fox, she calls herself the Black Carnivore. So if you haven't checked out her YouTube channel, she targets African Americans and particularly African American women who are trying to find a solution. Now, in her particular case, if she eats plants, she actually has a flare of her asthma. She has GI disturbance. She has skin rashes. So there are some people on the planet who do not tolerate plants as well as others. But more specifically, if I have a patient in front of me who has neuropathy, besides making sure they have a diet that reduces inflammation, right? And this particular diet was carnivore. I will say to them, consider supplementing with vitamin D, the B vitamins, particularly B6 and B12, and turmeric. And when I asked them to separate, and turmeric is probably one of the best anti-inflammatory supplements you will find. There are tons of other things you can do in terms of supplements, but I just want to keep it pretty simple and high level. So it starts with diet. You have to move your body. And I would encourage a person who's having that level of success to continue because, again, when you're eating protein, which is essentially what this person is eating, protein and fat, your need to make insulin is going to be greatly reduced. So that hyperinsulinemia I mentioned earlier won't occur. And that's why so many people are finding that they're healing. Now, just truth be told, when you're recommending dietary patterns, you try to be evidence-based. Sean Baker is one of the most highly, most known carnivores in the country. Of course, there's others like Peterson. But I'm saying that they don't have randomized controlled trials for that dietary pattern. You know, they have anecdotal evidence and they have observational trials, which only show possible association and correlation. So there was one big study that just came out recently. In fact, I did a video with A.J. Fox, the Black Carnivore, to talk about the study. And in that study, they said everything improved for everybody who did this, who were in this study. But this was like a survey study. You send in the questions, get the responses. That's why it doesn't show causation. It shows possible correlation, possible association. So the initial information we have is that this diet is safe. John Baker has raised over $1 million so they can do randomized controlled trials. And with that information, we'll have more confidence. What I do in practice is that if I have a person in front of me who don't tolerate plants or who wants to try this diet, I follow their markers, their labs that we do. And as long as things are getting better, I support them. But I generally recommend diets. That's why I'm not a carnivore. I'm kind of a keto doc, because I have plenty of studies that say low carb and keto are fine. So I just want to keep that perspective as we think about this question from Jimmy.
You know, I think also it's important that for this panel to clarify to our audience that when they're looking at studies that might say one thing or another, this one is better than that, we want to make sure that we're looking at the endpoints. So what is the endpoint of this study? Are they saying that this particular diet is good to improve someone's diabetes? Are they saying this is good to improve one's heart health? Are they saying this diet will improve one's ability to live longer, will reduce your mortality? So it's important that we understand exactly what the study is defining as the success point. And that always matters when we're saying something works or it doesn't work, because we're saying it works at doing what. And so many times when I'm having a conversation with my patients, I'm having to, and they say, well, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? What do you think about keto? What do you think about vegan? I said, think about it in terms of what? I mean, I can spell keto for you. I mean, like, what do you mean? Like, what do you want it to do? Like, what's your end point? Like, where's your goal? Okay, is your goal to lose weight? Is your goal to reduce your insulin sensitivity? If your goal is to live longer or to improve your heart health? So we have to define what that means. And I think it's important you have a discussion with your provider along with this panel. And if you have specific questions, we want to make sure that we're telling you what works for what. And so, and I love Dr. Hampton's definition around showing the difference between causation versus correlation. And those are all very important points too.
But I will say that sometimes it gets difficult because they're very difficult to separate out one little thing. You know, it's like, and that's because we have this medicine focused sort of perspective on things, where we take a pill for a headache, or we're taking a pill for blood pressure, or we're taking a pill doing this or that. And even though those pills may be targeted for those things, they do have other effects. And so we need to think about a number of things that way. I think that on the food side, we really got to be careful, because I know what it means to certain people, but you know, I would say we have to be careful, particularly when you start talking about low carb, because low carb and high fat, that's pretty much what keto can be. What keto is, not completely, but we need to be really clear about what that really means. And there's probably nothing more low carb than a whole food plant-based diet for the most part, as long as you're not using any processed or any too much supplementation with oils or what have you. So, I mean, we have to be careful. I think Pete, you make a good point in really making sure that people understand what it is we're talking about, because it's very, very confusing. I'll say this. I can tell you that as for 26 years, I spent as a urologist, most of that time taking care of men with erectile dysfunction. And I can tell you that the first sign that you've got this more generalized sort of damage to your inside blood flow lining is what happens with men when they notice that their erections aren't as hard as they used to be, because the erection is a function of trapped blood. And for the young men, for the men out there who can remember, and for those who still have them, very hard erections, when you notice your erections, when they're very, very hard, and you're standing there, your penis will sort of beat in coincident with your heartbeat, because it's that pressure that's holding that erection. And we won't get into that tonight, but it's important to understand that diseases don't always happen just by themselves. Oftentimes they happen in groups.
I do want to, and this also, not, I want to mention this also speaks to kind of the general issues that a lot of times our community face. When the more we talk and the more I hear the docs talk, the more I think about disease and the root of that, right? Disease, the root of disease is dis-ease. So when we talk about heart, and like I think Dr. Mason mentioned, it's not just in your heart, but because that cardiologist or that person was focused on the heart, they call it heart, but dis-ease. And the things we can do to put our heart at ease, right? And to me, there's always several different facets of any wellness or unwellness, right? We talk about heart disease, and then a lot of times when I address it, I told you all the story about a person before, a man. I was like, oh, just go running, just go do this, and they began to unload and tell me all the things that were going on. And physically, they had heart disease, right? That's the natural manifestation. Spiritually and emotionally, their heart was broken because of, so their spiritual heart and emotional heart was at dis-ease also. And so creating a situation where it's not just focused on that, like, oh, just do this, and the physical heart should feel better, but also looking at the narrative that we create for a person's perceived quality of life, right? So if I'm not doing anything about like kind of an environment, creating those spaces, and the more and more we talk, the more and more I know it sounds like we have to, as healthcare professionals, do our part to create these safe spaces for Black and brown people, and not just speaking that, but actually doing that. Creating spaces like Dr. Pete was doing, just running around the neighborhood. And you should have seen the smiles on their face. And they were like, come running with us. They were so happy. Those endorphins was in. You hear me? Endorphins in, and then looking at, and then creating a space where, if emotionally and spiritually, because I really believe that's the first, and one of the first treatments for that is hope. Doing the things policy wise, like we have, people on the, but talking about it, right? Policy wise, doing the things environmental wise, and creating environments where people are like, I realize my king or queenship, and I want to create something for my physical body, my physical temple, where I'm taking care of it and fixing that emotional and spiritual heart dis-ease, that brokenheartedness that a lot of our communities experience. I think is the first step, because now I'm recognizing my desire to come in and fix it so I'm able to enjoy my life long term, and not seeking it in things like alcohol. We talk about a lot of, when people are experiencing diabetes, heart disease, we got to look at their alcohol intake and really have conversations about that. The more I'm doing it, I will tell you, ever since that people, the more I'm doing that, the more I'm, kind of honing in that a lot of this is heart disease. And so having conversations about that, I'm very excited to do, because medicine is more than the 15 minutes in the clinic.
All right. But, Jacqueline Cooper says, when dealing with chronic disease, what things can I do to boost my immune system? I have cut out sugar and I use honey as a sweetener. What are other foods that can help me?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like when it comes to, it's so funny. I actually have a guest on my podcast for this week on Friday. Her name is Natasha Trenev, and she is with a company called Natron. And the reason why I reached out to her is because I was taking, but when I had irritable bowel issues, I actually started healing initially with probiotics. Then I kind of transitioned to being a vegetarian / vegan. And then I ended up low carb, which is what has helped me the most. Having said that, probiotics are greatly important for your gut health and your immune system, because we may have talked about this in the past. Your immune system is primarily started in your gut, right? So, and if you don't have a healthy if your gut is unhealthy, all kinds of stuff will get into your body. So you need literally the acid in your stomach to be working well. But once you get into your intestines, you need your bacteria to be healthy. So I would absolutely recommend probiotics. And if you want to learn more, you can check out that episode. If you think about COVID, a lot of people like literally I think obesity and vitamin D deficiencies were the biggest risk factors for COVID, right? Literally 98% of the people who died from COVID were vitamin D deficient, which is a crazy statistic. So if that's true, we now know that vitamin D is a great resource for our immune system. And I'll only then add, what did I tell my patients who are trying to not have, recover from their colds and stuff? I mentioned vitamin C, I mentioned echinacea, elderberry syrup, and zinc. Those are the things that come to mind for the immune system. I'm not a big fan of the honey does help your immune system, no question. But because so many of my patients have metabolic issues, they could probably find better ways to improve their immune system without adding the sugar that comes from the honey. So I tend to minimize honey. If you're metabolically healthy, you're fine. A study just came out literally this month. We used to tell people only 12% of the population is metabolically healthy. Well, guess what? Tufts University just put out a new study, and it's now down to 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy. If you're not metabolically healthy, you shouldn't be adding all of these sugary items to your body. And that's for Americans. I think the number is at 2 or 3% of people of color, African Americans, are metabolically healthy, which is a very scary statistic.
Dr. Hampton, so define what is metabolically healthy.
Oh yeah, I speak that language a lot, and again, that means that you have 5 things that are not in the normal range. Number 1, your blood pressure is not in the normal range. I would just say 135 over 85 or higher, and that's not good. Number 2, your blood sugar is not normal, defined by your fasting blood sugar, being over, I'll just say 124. Your hemoglobin A1C is, over 5.7, etc. Your triglycerides are too high, which is the fats in your blood. Your HDL, which is a good cholesterol, is too low. And of course, the most important is your belly, your waist circumference. If you're male, is greater than 40 inches, and if you're female, greater than 35 inches. So if you have 3 of those 5, you're considered metabolically, you have metabolic syndrome. If you have any of them, you're considered not metabolically healthy. And again, only 7% of Americans are metabolically healthy, which is why I'm obsessed with teaching metabolic health, because 80% of all chronic medical conditions are from metabolic diseases, which is from hyperinsulinemia. And so if we can reduce the insulin burden, then we can, by eating the right foods, reducing stress, getting enough sleep, then we will then reduce the number of people who are at risk for having an immune system that's not functioning properly as well.
Okay, I want to say hey to Audrey J. Cox, who's here with us. Leonard says, Dr. Hampton, I am a carnivore and I have reversed my type 2, and I think he means type 2 diabetes. Are there any plants that are vital to optimal health?
Absolutely. If a person is intolerant of plants, right, then they need to not eat a lot of plants. So some of the people in the carnivore community, and I think some of the questions that we're getting tonight, because I just left a conference where a lot of people were carnivores. So some of those people have found me on YouTube is what I'm thinking. And I appreciate them doing that. Now, having said that, if you are, what I learned from my functional medicine nutrition training, that they do have anti-nutrients in plants, right? Phytates, lectins, oxalates. These things can inhibit the absorption of some of the nutrients that you need. Now, some people also believe in the concept of hormesis, which means that you challenge your body. So the challenge of these anti-nutrients can actually make you stronger. It's just like when you lift weights, you have to tear the muscle down to build the muscle up. So there's controversy about that. But as a general rule, I think that for people who tolerate plants, you're going to reduce inflammation if you eat plants that don't bother you. You're going to improve your blood pressure. Although carnivores, lions don't need fiber and carnivores don't need fiber, in my opinion. So having said that, if you do need fiber because you're eating the standard American diet, the plants will give you fiber. So, and if you meet somebody that's eating plants, they'll do really well. So I'm going to keep mine very simple. And I'm only going to say in my world where I live, I think most plants are okay if you tolerate them, but I just prefer you eat non-starchy plants because, again, if what I just said is true, 7% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy, then if I eat rice, that's a grain, that's not really a plant, so that's a bad example. Let's just say a potato. The amount of starch in a potato is not probably something that the average diabetic can tolerate when they have other options. So I tend to say eat the mashed cauliflower, which is 4 carbs versus the potato. So I would just lean towards any vegetable. I like green things, you know. So I like you know, the kales and the bok choys and the spinach and the, you know, the greens. I like those things more than other types of plants, but I would lean in that direction and just focus on non-starchy plants.
But there's nothing like a plate of turnips and bottoms. That's all I'm going to say. I'm going to share that because it's nothing like some turnips and some bottoms. Now, for those of you out there, nothing like it. For those of you out there that know what turnips and bottoms is, it will make the world better. And for those of you who don't, I want to encourage you to have some turnip greens and some bottoms. And don't forget about a rutabaga. It's your friend. Have a rutabaga. Now, you know, Virginia Knight says, I've slowed down on the sugar. Jackie Robinson says, yes, ma'am. So she knows about those turnips and those bottoms. Virginia Knight loves that bok choy. She's sharing that with us. And I want to go up for 1 second because I didn't want to miss Val's question. Val stated, you know, Val was really thanking you for answering the heart health questions, but he had an additional question. He said, should African Americans get LDL studies annually?
No. Now let me make a caveat of that.
So Tony says no. I'm going to come right back
no.
and repeat.
Yeah, it's very tricky though, because like if a person comes to me and I say, well, I think a better test is a calcium score test, right? That's a true statement. But if it's a 0, it's very valuable. But if it's a 100, it's not as valuable because the 0 makes you feel comfortable. You're probably okay. But all of these tests they're not perfect. So I tell people you need to think about all of the tests in total. So yes, if you want to get I do check LDL cholesterols annually on most of my patients. So that's a true statement. My initial response is that don't rely on the LDL. I did not mention LDL when I said metabolic syndrome. That was not mentioned because that test is not as helpful as the triglycerides and the HDL, something called the apolipoprotein B, C-peptide, apolite. You know, all these other tests have been clinically proven to be more predictive of a heart attack. So I guess I'll rephrase my statement to say you should probably check your cholesterol annually, but don't depend on the cholesterol and LDL. Focus on the triglycerides to HDL ratio, the cholesterol to HDL ratios. Those numbers need to be lower, 2, 1. If those ratios are good, and you have a test like you can have in Advocate Aurora, we do the heart scan for like $49, and if you have a good number there, then you can sit down with your doctor and make decisions about a statin, because the statin is really focused on the LDL more than anything and inflammation. But if you have all these other markers of inflammation looking really good, and you don't have plaques in your arteries, especially if you're 50, 60 or older, that's a very good indication that your risk for a heart attack is much less. It's very complicated, and it's a long discussion. We can have an entire hour or 2 or 3 just talking about, cholesterol issues, and it gets very complex. So, but
Yeah.
I'll leave it with that.
Yeah, I'll just say, in general, in all my years of practicing, and particularly with running the men's clinic at Cook County Project Brotherhood, we are always better off with more information than less. So I think it's not an either or, but it's an and. I appreciate Dr. Hampton's insight about being too comfortable with your LDL levels that are kind of middle of the road, and even from what we're traditionally taught are good numbers. And so he's like, look, there's other tests out there that could show you more information. So I'm 100% on that. I'm 100% on doing, because in general, how I practice is I bring out the big guns first, because I'm about survival. Our patients do not live as long for a reason. People drag their feet when it comes to treating African-American patients. And so I don't do that. I come out guns blazing first. Okay. So I'm in a very survival mode. I've always practiced with marginalized populations that didn't have access to stuff. Food deserts, you name it. They are stressed out. Kids are getting killed. The whole nine. They're taking care of the great grandnephew. So we have to mitigate all of those issues. And at any level, I would definitely do the scan, definitely do the LDL, definitely check the blood, definitely check the C-peptide, do it all. And if we have to fight with the insurance companies, because it's going to be a fight to get them to pay for stuff that they don't want to pay for. And I have to always tell my patients, they're like, I don't understand why I have good insurance. Yeah, they good at saving money for the corporation to make sure their stock goes up. And how they save money is they spend less money on you. And so, but definitely we can do, there are prior authorization forms that we have to complete. We don't like to do them, but we do them. We do them for the sake of why we went into this business, right? So if we got to fight with the insurance companies to get you approved for this procedure or a test, we'll do it.
One thing I just wanted to say before we close out, and we don't talk much about, and that is water. Water is a very, very important thing. And I don't think that stuff that contains water, like pop and all, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about water, just good old-fashioned water. And it's important. And I'm going to make also another point for the fiber that Dr. mentioned earlier, and that is because fiber is the scaffolding in the intestine upon which many bacteria grow, and we need many of these bacteria for appropriate digestion and vitamin production and other things. So don't misplace that. And in addition to that, we have, when you go to the drugstore, and I'll stop in, I've said this before, you go to a lot of the drugstores, especially in most communities, and you got a whole wall of drugs for constipation. And we're going to have to have another conversation about constipation, what it is, what it isn't, what is important to do, how should it be treated, what it should be a sign for. So there's a lot of things, but I did want to just raise those two things, because the fiber, the water, those things are also very important for preventing constipation. And when you look at how many drugs there are in our communities particularly, but in general, there are walls of drugs, walls, not just a section, a whole wall of drug for constipation. So I'm going to stop with that because I know our time is up.
We got you. Oh,
Okay, I'm here. James Harvey says, very good. Val Talley says, Congressman, can you work with the insurance industry to be a better advocate for good health? That's what Val is asking. He's asking the congressman if we can work on insurance industry so they can be better advocates on health. You know, before we do our Until Next Mondays, I just thought that something that May Ross said was great for this evening. Basically, May Ross is thanking the congressman. She says that your program has made me more aware of what I am putting in my body. And what we put in our body makes a world of difference on how we kind of deal with everything from this conversation we've talked about today. So I think that is such a great statement from May Ross. I thank you so much. Douglas Graham, what is your thoughts until next Monday?
Well, one, I just want to say that I really like Dr. Pete's approach to go fast and strong first because there isn't time to waste. I really want to support that. The other thing is, this is really my favorite time of year. When you go to the grocery store, you have more selections of fruits and vegetables than any other time. So if you're curious about something, this is your chance to try it, see if it works for you, and expand your diet to things that might be healthier.
Awesome. Dr. Terry Mason, you're until next Monday.
Well, until next Monday, understand that this is an evolving situation and there's a lot to learn and there are many different opinions. And so what you try and do as best you can is separate the opinion from as best fact as you can get so that you can make the best decisions for your own health.
Outstanding. You know, Dr. Hampton, right before, and I don't know if you and Doug and Terry there was a question that I missed and they kind of reminded me really quickly 2 times. And we do have a minute where I can throw it out here. We got a couple inbox questions in reference to some supplement gummies that there's a platform of tons of supplement gummies that are on the market to help people lose weight. So people are asking, does these supplement gummies, whoever they're making them, wherever they're coming from, do they work? Is this something that we think they should invest in? Doug, go ahead. You're nodding.
Well, I can't comment on this. I mean, this is kind of outside what I know. I'd kind of be concerned about this, though, because this is a big business. And there's lots of times they promote things to make money. And they're trying to help themselves when they're trying to help. But again, I don't know any real facts on the set of circumstances.
Okay. All right.
He's
Dr.
right.
Dr. Mason, you're nodding yes. Did you want to share?
No, I'll just say really very quickly. I don't know about these gummies, and something that I'm beginning to write. We need to stop focusing so much on weight loss, and begin to focus a lot more on how to prevent weight gain. Because if you don't gain it, you don't have to worry about trying to lose it. So this is where, and unfortunately, there's very little out there to help people navigate in such a way that they can prevent the traps of the food industry and create the weight gain that they then have to sit around and turn around and figure out and have anxiety about, how do I lose?
Outstanding, Dr. Mason. Outstanding. Dr. Maya, do you have any thoughts on this as well? Dr. Maya is having some connection issues, so we can't see her video, but she's here. She's here for audio.
I think the best source of
Dr. Maya?
Can you hear me? No?
I can hear.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. So it's video and
yes.
audio. I think the best source for all these things that we want is natural foods. You have to watch gummies because a lot of them are based in a lot of sugar and other products. So they're taking something healthy and putting it in an unhealthy package and then giving it to you. So you do have to watch gummies. Until next Monday too. I wish let's continue that conversation about that LDO because the block got hot, as they say. I was like, whoa, wait a minute.
Sure did. You are absolutely right.
My connection got dropped off, so I'm gonna bring you back up next week. So Yeah, we gotta, there are a lot of, I think, consult with your primary care. I definitely, for my patients, I'm doing it, and I think as my connection left, I heard a yes and not a no, but at first I thought I heard a no, but we'll hash that out next week. Thanks.
All right, we'll hash it out next week. Dr. Hampton, your comments on the gummies and your until next Monday.
Yeah, I know a lot of my patients come in asking about gummies, in particular as it relates to apple cider vinegar, and sometimes as it relates to ketones. So even if you go back over 100 years, when a person was considered corpulent, which is another way of saying over their ideal body weight, apple cider vinegar was used on a regular basis to help them, and it was also helpful for regulating your blood sugar. And it suppresses your appetite. It helps with your cholesterol. So apple cider vinegar is definitely a great supplement. Dr. Maya is right. Let's do as much as we can through our diet. Now, obviously, having apple cider vinegar, if you can tolerate that taste, is a better approach than gummies, because as was suggested, the carrying the vessel is definitely has a lot of sugar in it, and we're trying to reduce the sugar as much as possible. Anytime you take a supplement like that to get ketones in your body, that's not really logical, because if you reduce your carbs, your body will use your body fat as its source of fat fuel, because fat turns into ketones. So if you keep consuming ketones, trying to get into ketosis because you're interested in this keto lifestyle, what you'll find is that you're actually you got to burn that fat from that gummy before you can burn your body fat. So you don't want to over consume these types of products. I think what was suggested is what I would recommend. Until next Monday, I think that Dr. Mason's right. We have to be willing to process this information in a way that allows us to hear everybody's voice. And if we hear everybody's voice, we'll be open to learning, and we may find a new path that maybe is different than our current path. I think it's the responsibility of clinicians to, like, I'm part of the Diet Doctor team where I write monthly articles with that team, right? And that's the number one low carb website in the world. And what I like about that team is that they always speak the language of, let me tell you what the study says, but they'll always tell you the quality of the study. They'll always tell you the biases within the study. So I know the people watching and listening can't necessarily be as expert as a clinician or a researcher to do that, but I do expect clinicians and the media to share data in a way that's more appropriate. So instead of just saying, don't eat this or don't eat that, at least give us some idea of how much we can trust that study, so that people won't get confused and they can then make their own decisions based on that. And the last thing I'll say is that as people are struggling and trying to improve their lifestyle, again, going back to what I talked about when I went to KetoCon this past weekend, think about where you may struggle. It may not be because you're not following the right diet. You may be doing that really well, but maybe you're not getting enough sleep. Maybe your stress level is high. Maybe your relationships are not where they need to be. Maybe you're having emotional issues. Maybe you've had trauma you haven't recovered from. Until you get to those issues, you will not have a normal blood pressure. You will not have a normal blood sugar, and you will continue to suffer from chronic illnesses. So I just encourage everybody listening, think outside the box. It's not one answer to fix everything. There are many things you have to consider before you can heal.
Outstanding. Well, Valdemir Talley says, thank you all for all of your great information that you shared on this evening. Audrey Jaycock says, I just love these informative conversations. Thank you so much. Jimmy Z is a Monday night watcher, so we want to thank him for being a Monday night watcher. Thank you so much, Jimmy. And Jackie basically says that she appreciates being able to listen and to be here, and she knows that this to be true because it's happening to her. That's another thing that popped up at the same time while I was reading. So she really appreciates the conversation and having the opportunity to listen and learn. A couple inboxes wants to thank Dr. Maya Green for teaching them about monkeypox. And they said that they came by and got a vaccine, and they want to thank her for open arms and being just that Dr. 100, who she is. And also want to say, remember that COVID is still out here. So if you're in a place where you don't feel safe, make sure that you still have your mask. Don't forget to wash your hands and do all the sanitizing things that you need to do to stay safe from COVID. And we'll have our closing remarks from the man who makes this possible for us on every Monday night, remembering to teach us all that health is the true wealth is health. That's our very own Congressman of the Illinois 7th Congressional District, Congressman Danny K. Davis. Take us home.
Well, I was thinking of two of my dear friends. One, Dr. Dennis Deere, who's always fond of saying, if you keep doing what you've always done, then you can always get what you always got. And so learning takes a bit of time, and it also produces results when we take the time to learn. Another gentleman that I sometimes quote is a fellow named James Cole, who passed away. Folks in the community call him the Shine King guy. And I think I've referenced him a time or two in terms of saying when I first met him, he was walking down Madison Street with the shoe shine kit, and he would stop you and shine your shoes. Well, he ultimately went into business, and he was so good at what he did until any time a celebrity like presidents and other kind of people come through the community, if we were trying to help them get elected, we'd always take them to Shine King. And we've taken presidents there, we've taken mayors there, we've taken millionaires there. And I want to say to his family, especially his sons, one who happens to be the electrician that I usually use when I have an electrical problem, that Jim has been a tremendous asset to the community and a great inspiration. As a matter of fact, Isaiah Thomas used to shine shoes at Shine King. And of course, Isaiah became an all-star basketball player in high school, college, the pros, and is an outstanding business person. So James I. Cade, I don't mean James I, but James Cole has left a tremendous imprint on especially the west side of the city of Chicago and the western suburbs. So I just end by saying to his family that we have all enjoyed his friendship and the relationships, and he has inspired so many by taking that shoe shine kit and becoming not only an economically secure individual, but a great motivator and stimulator to others. So thank you all so much. Wonderful evening, and We look forward to seeing you next week.